In 1962, a French geologist climbed into a glacier cave 130 meters underground and stayed there for 63 days without a clock, without sunlight, and without a single reference point for time. His name was Michel Siffre. He wasn't testing geology, he was testing something far stranger. What happens to the human sense of time when you remove every external marker of it? And what he found didn't just surprise him, it suggested that everything we think we know about natural human time is wrong. Siffre expected his internal clock to roughly track 24 hours. Instead, his days stretched to 25, sometimes 30 hours. He'd wake, work, eat, and prepare for night, only to check later and find he'd actually been awake for 36 hours straight, convinced only half a day had passed. By the time he emerged, he believed it was August 20th. It was September 14th. His mind had lost 25 days without noticing. Here's what most people don't realize. For over 300,000 years, humans lived exactly like this, untethered from clocks, and it didn't break us. It's the opposite. The clock is the anomaly. We are. So the question isn't really, what did ancient humans do before clocks? The real question is what happened to the body that used to run without one, and whether that body is still in here, underneath the version of you that wakes to an alarm. For most of human history, time wasn't a number. It was a set of sensations. Light shifting on skin, temperature dropping in the chest, hunger arriving on its own schedule. There was no 9 a.m. There was only brighter and dimmer, warmer and colder, and a body that responded to both without being told to. That sounds primitive, until you realize we're not actually that far removed from it. The mechanical clock is roughly 700 years old. Widespread public clock towers didn't appear in Europe until the 14th century, and personal timekeeping, a watch, a schedule, a shift start time, is barely 150 years old, a byproduct of railroads and factories that needed workers to arrive in unison. Out of roughly 300,000 years of Homo sapiens existing, we've been clock-bound for less than 0.05% of that time. Which raises an uncomfortable paradox. If the clock is this recent, why does its absence now feel unbearable? Ask anyone to spend a day with no phone, no watch, no way to check the time, and most describe it as disorienting, even anxiety-inducing. We've built a species-wide dependency on something that, biologically, we didn't evolve to need. The tool we invented to organize time has quietly replaced the body that used to sense it. So what filled that role before? Not guesswork, not vague instinct, a precise internal system. And in 2013, we finally got hard data on how it worked in populations still living without artificial schedules. Neuroscientist Jerome Siegel and colleagues at UCLA studied 3 pre-industrial societies, the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia, groups with no electricity, no clocks, and no artificial light beyond firelight. The study, published in the journal Current Biology in 2015, fitted these communities with wrist monitors to track sleep and activity down to the minute, over hundreds of days combined. The results dismantled a popular myth almost immediately. It's often assumed that pre-industrial humans slept when the sun went down and woke when it rose. Early to bed, early to rise, roughly 10 or 11 hours a night. The data showed something else entirely. These groups stayed awake for an average of 3 hours and 20 minutes after sunset, active around the fire, talking, and slept for only about 6.4 hours a night, nearly identical to, or even less than, the average urban sleeper today. But here's the detail that mattered most. Sleep onset wasn't triggered by darkness. It was triggered by temperature. Across all 3 groups, sleep consistently began as ambient temperature started dropping. Not at a fixed clock hour, but at a specific point in the cooling curve of the night. And it ended as temperature began rising again near dawn. Their internal clock wasn't reading light, it was reading thermal change, with a precision that modern lab studies on circadian rhythm would later confirm down to fractions of a degree. Sit with that for a second. Somewhere in your nervous system, that same mechanism is still running. Your body still drops in core temperature at night, still responds to thermal shifts whether or not you're aware of it, still runs a program built for a world with no artificial lighting at all. You just override it every night with a thermostat set to 68 degrees and blackout curtains that erase the signal completely. And this is where it gets stranger. If sleep wasn't governed by a single unbroken block the way we assume, then maybe our modern 8 hours straight or you're doing it wrong model isn't natural either. This is where historian Roger Ekirch's research changes the picture entirely. Ekirch, at Virginia Tech, spent over a decade combing through diaries, court records, and medical texts from pre-industrial Europe, over 500 references spanning centuries, and found repeated mention of something almost no one alive today has experienced: first sleep and second sleep. People would go to bed shortly after dusk, sleep for roughly 4 hours, then wake for 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the night, praying, talking, having sex, tending a fire, sometimes visiting neighbors, before returning to a second sleep until dawn. This wasn't insomnia. It was considered completely ordinary. Physicians of the era gave medical advice for what to do specifically during the waking period between the two sleeps, the way we'd give advice about what to eat for breakfast, not even close to how we sleep now. And that gap didn't happen by accident. Segmented sleep began disappearing in the late 17th and 18th centuries. And the timeline lines up almost exactly with the spread of artificial street lighting and later industrial work schedules. As cities lit up and factories demanded fixed shifts, that middle-of-the-night waking period stopped being useful. And within a few generations, it stopped being remembered. By the 1920s, Ekirch found references to first and second sleep had essentially vanished from the written record. Not because human biology changed, because the environment that shaped it did in less than 200 years, a blink, compared to the hundreds of thousands of years that built the pattern in the first place. There's a woman named Elena, a Tsimane grandmother interviewed as part of the Bolivia field research supporting the Siegel study, who was asked through a translator what she did on nights she couldn't fall asleep right away. She didn't describe frustration. She described walking outside, checking whether the fire needed wood, and waiting. Her word for it translated was closer to listening than waiting, until her body told her it was ready. There was no anxiety attached to being awake in the dark. There was no failure in it. It was simply a part of the night that belonged to her, the same way daylight belonged to work. That's the piece we lost that no wearable device can give back. Not the segmented sleep pattern itself, but the total absence of shame around not sleeping on command. Because think about what happens now at 2 a.m. when you wake and can't fall back asleep. Almost everyone reaches for the same explanation first. Something is wrong with me. Stress, anxiety, insomnia, a disorder to be fixed. But for most of human history, that exact waking window was expected, medically normal, and even useful. We didn't lose the biology. We lost the permission to have it. The modern body is still built with a night that has two halves. We've just pathologized the middle. This is the quiet cost of the clock. It didn't just organize our days. It convinced us our own bodies are unreliable without it. Every time you check a screen to find out if you're allowed to feel tired yet, you're outsourcing a judgment your ancestors made instinctively, using nothing but temperature, light, and the sound of a fire settling into embers. The Hadza aren't sleeping better because they're simpler. They're sleeping in sync with a signal we've spent 200 years learning to ignore. So the next time you're lying awake at an hour that feels wrong, know this: your body isn't malfunctioning. It's running a night mode that existed for 300,000 years before anyone decided it needed fixing. The clock on your nightstand is younger than your grandmother's grandmother. The rhythm underneath it is older than language itself, and it never actually left. It's just been waiting quietly for the lights to go out long enough to hear it again.